The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Firearms Radio Network and or their employers. Viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on live shows. Oh man, that doesn't work for me.
Is what's going to make the difference between winning and losing, whether it's a two-way range or a one-way range.
It's amazing how much grip you add to your hand, one-handed shooting. So,
before we get into tonight's episode, we want to introduce our newest show sponsor. That's 2abuyersgroup.com. 2abuyersgroup.com is offering all of its members wholesale and dealer cost pricing on all firearms and firearms-related accessories. It's like having your very own personal FFL without having to do all the compliance and paperwork and setting up accounts with distributors and dealers. It's 2abuyersgroup.com. Enter After Action for 25% off your first month membership.
This is the After Action Project, and we're bringing you the student's perspective on firearms training. This is the podcast that takes you inside the eyes of the student and the mind of the instructor, from practical to tactical, medical to legal, and everything in between. If there's a course for it, this is your fly-on-the-wall After Action destination. This is the After Action Project.
Stay tuned throughout the show tonight to find out how to get some bonus entries into our monthly giveaway. If you want to get a head start on that, visit afteractionproject.com. If you like what we're doing and would like to help support the show, visit patreon.com/afteractionproject. And if you'd like to throw us some free support and appreciation, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review on iTunes. Last week, we talked about this being the least reviewed podcast on the Firearms Radio Network. So if we get your help changing that, it would be greatly appreciated. Tonight's episode, just like every episode, is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network. Be sure to check out the other great podcasts on the Firearms Radio Network by visiting firearmsradio.tv. Tonight, we are joined by Massad Ayoob of Massad Ayoob Group, and we will be bringing you into the student seat of his MAG20 Range Day course. So for those folks that might have missed our episode last year with Moss, it was a great episode. We expect the same tonight. Andy and I had the great pleasure of taking the MAG20 Range Day course a couple weekends ago. Andy outshot me by a good bit. As he'll tell you, he was he was one of the better shots in had one of the top scores for that qualification, but I'll let him spill those beans later on. But before we do that, Moss, why don't you tell us a little bit about the MAG20 Range Day course and, a brief introduction into who you are for those few folks out there that haven't heard of you. I don't think that really fits anybody's bill. I believe, at this point in time, if folks don't know who you are, they've been sleeping under a rock or living under a rock. But just in case one or two of those folks tuned in tonight, give us a little intro about you.
Well, basically, on the shooting side of it, my dad was a shooter, and he started me off at the age of 4 with a 22 rifle. Handguns at 9, got my first 45 at 12. And that was the age I started working in the family jewelry store, where the law allowed me to carry a gun there, and I was required to do so by my dad. Got into competitive shooting when I was informally in my early teens, and seriously at about 18 or 19. Became a cop in my early 20s and immediately became a firearms instructor because I was a shooter. My dad's and published in gun magazines, and I guess they were desperate enough they figured that qualified. So that set me on a very intense program of getting all the training I could from the best schools like Smith & Wesson Academy at that time and others. Continued competition, won my first state championship at 25. Over the years, had the good fortune to win a bunch of state and regional titles and a couple of minor national titles. 2005, they told me I was the first of the IDPA 5-gun masters. Basically, from the shooting side, what I started with early, because my orientation was always defensive and law enforcement, was shooting under stress. And I started in the 70s developing what I came to call stress fire, a system of the best shooting techniques that I could find that would feed off stress instead of breaking down under it. It struck me early on that we had been doing things backwards. The history of it was the instructor in charge of the training program would go to the range, shoot this way, shoot that way, and whatever got the best hits, figured, well, that's what we'll teach our guys to shoot with on the street. And we were seeing some pretty hellacious failures out there. NYPD, prior to 1970, when they were the first of the big departments to go to virtually all two-handed eye-level shooting. They had been right at 50-50 win-loss in gunfights. And within a couple of years of going to the two-handed isosceles and the use of the sights, they were winning 11 out of 12 gunfights. And that was not lost on me. We saw the same thing with LAPD. When I went out there and studied with them, they had sent Mudgett and Helms, two of their top people, to gun sites with Jeff Cooper, Chapman Academy with Ray Chapman. And they did pretty much what New York did. They went from the hip shooting at 7 yards and all that crap to two-handed eye-level shooting, and their hit potential increased dramatically, particularly, from the patrol level to Metro to SWAT and SIS, the Special Investigations Section. That was their real heavy-duty felony squad. And basically, starting in the 70s, I figured, okay, we've been doing this crap backwards. We're teaching stuff like, 40% hand strength with the firing hand, 60% with the support hand. And it always seemed to be accompanied by, and above all, just relax. And that stuff tended to break down when the crap hit the fan. So I figured, okay, let's reverse engineer this. And in the early 70s, I started studying what happens to the human body under stress, going back to Dr. Walter Cannon's work at Harvard Medical School in the first decade of the 20th century. And the bottom line of that was physical strength will significantly increase, endurance will increase, pain tolerance will increase, but dexterity will absolutely fall out your butt. So I figured, okay, we need emphasis on strength. We need emphasis on gross motor more than fine motor. I was an early voice in the wilderness in the 70s and 80s when I said, yeah, guys, the Weaver stance is good and it has its place. But there are actually some weaknesses to it. And the isosceles stance that you guys are all saying belongs in the land of the dinosaurs, actually, if you do it right, has some significant advantages over Weaver. And I'm happy to say the years have proven me right on that.
Nice.
I was an early voice for the semi-automatic pistol and police service. And I remember in the 70s when around the table, when, all the cops on duty that night met for a meal, the troopers had revolvers, the deputies had revolvers, most of the municipal guys had revolvers. I had a Colt 45 automatic. And it's like, oh my God, he's a radical. He's a maverick. Well, fast forward 1990. I was doing a class for Washington State law enforcement firearms instructors. And when I got up to the podium, we had all the coats off, of course. I had a 1911 45 on my hip. And a young cop in the front row says in a stage whisper, look, he's got an old 1911. Hasn't this dinosaur ever heard of Glocks? And I'm sitting there thinking, you come a long way, baby. But along the way, I spent 19 years as chair of the Firearms Committee for American Society of Law Enforcement Trainers. And I'm in my 17th year now on the advisory board for International Law Enforcement Educators and Trainers Association. Taught a few times for ILFE, the International Association of Law Enforcement Firearms Instructors. And what all that did, it gave me access to a tremendous pool of the best and the brightest in law enforcement training, not just what they were doing, but why they were doing it. By then, people had realized, we can't teach because this is what we've always done. And we have the new model that we have today of studying what actually happens in gunfights and tailoring the training accordingly. And all of that is what I try to funnel into the shooting program that I shared with you guys, what we call MAG20 Range.
Nice. Hey, Massad, tell me a little bit more about that course. Just like what are the details that we need to know as far as, if I'm looking for a course for defensive shooting, why would I choose your course?
Well, basically what you do is look at everybody's curriculum and see what you need as opposed to, does the instructor look good on YouTube?
Okay.
Essentially what we try to do with our program, we go on the assumption that the people coming in have basic firearm safety, and we're going to take it from there.
Awesome.
Now, what we got is exactly what you saw. There were some students there who were pretty new to the gun. And we had guys like you who'd been shooting since Christ was a corporal. And each of them will get something different out of it. If you have been shooting since Christ was a corporal, not a lot of it's going to be new to you. But what you're getting is kind of the busman's holiday thing, where you're looking at, okay, here's somebody who's been teaching people how to shoot since 1972. Let's see if he's learned any way to streamline this or deal with that type of hostile learner, or adapt this physically disadvantaged student to this particular gun that might or might not be suitable for them, but it's what they're stuck with. As far as weapons, we suggest the individual bring the gun they're most likely to be using in self-defense, whether it's their house gun in Hawaii or their concealed carry gun in, let's say, New Mexico. We suggest you have a spare because anything made by man can fail. And one of my mentors, Ray Chapman, had Chapman's corollary to Murphy's Law. The likelihood of your weapon malfunctioning or breaking will increase in direct proportion to how desperately you need it to work. You'll go through about 500 rounds. You'll need at least 3 magazines or speed loaders. 4 is better. Good quality holster. Unlike some schools, we do not ban appendix carry, but we're particularly insistent that the holstering in particular be done correctly. And if we see anyone not doing it the way we teach, that is the hips forward, the shoulders rocked back, and actually watching the gun go into the appendix carry holster, we'll bring the shooter around to a hip holster.
Gotcha.
We have some students, particularly some with shoulder problems, who find a cross draw works better for them, or even a shoulder holster. And we adapt to them simply by showing them how to angle the torso as they begin the draw, so the gun's not going to cross anyone next to them. And the right-handed shooter will be on the far left of the line, the left-handed shooter on the far right. We do not allow the middle of the back holsters. I consider those unsafe as hell, as well as impractical. For the shooter, if the shooter's knocked down flat on their back, they've guaranteed the equivalent of landing on a rock on their lumbar spine with full body weight every time. But also, we've never found a way to draw from middle of the back without crossing the shooter next to you or the range officer standing at the shooter.
So, Massad, just because you mentioned that, I don't allow 6 o'clock carry either. I don't allow cross draws on my range. What about ankle draw?
Ankle draw we do allow, though we rarely see it.
Okay, I understand.
There's, you see everything going back to the 1960s and the 1950s. Chick Gaylord's stork draw, where you stand on one foot, raise the ankle while you're standing, and hopefully don't have to hop away from the guy coming at you with the machete.
Right.
In schools where they teach drop to kneeling, and yeah, that can work, but A, it's slow, and B, it sacrifices your mobility. So we teach, as you recall, one of the techniques we teach for low cover is the cover crouch, essentially an exaggerated martial artist horse stance with the feet very wide apart. For the ankle holster shooter, we'll have them put the gun on, if they're right-handed, on the inside of the left ankle, butt to the rear. Grab a fistful of the left trouser leg before they begin to go into the crouch and rip upwards. That allows them to, as they go into that deep crouch, to draw the gun without taking their eyes off the threat. They're still in a coiled position where they can very quickly move laterally. They can shoot from there, or if there's time, go back to their preferred standing position. And we found that to be the best way for a standing person to deploy from an ankle holster.
I like it.
I want to talk a little bit more about the class, but before we get too far into that rabbit hole, Andy, let's talk about the gear that you used, and I'll go through the gear that I brought with me to class. But what gun were you shooting, holster, all that good stuff, man?
Sure. So I chose to use my Blue Alpha gear belt. It's a duty belt. It has the inner belt that I wear every day, and then it has an outer belt that goes on with Velcro. Really, really quality belts. If you do any kind of gun research and stuff like that, YouTube, you'll see that Blue Alpha gear is pretty much top notch. I used an open carry holster, and believe it or not, I still use an Alien gear holster just because it's mounted on my belt and I don't want to take it off. But I mean, it's been quality for me. I haven't had any issues. When I conceal carry, I'll use a Milt Sparks or a Black Rhino concealment. So different story. I have a Black Rhino concealment double mag pouch on my left side. What else? I usually use a dump pouch. For me, I've taken a few classes, as you know. I like to pay attention in class, but especially if you go to these gun classes with guys like Massad Ayoob or Dave Spalding, these guys that have been in the game for a long time, there's so much information. There's only so much your brain sponge can absorb. But I try to pay attention as much as I can. So often when guys are over there trying to reload to stay in the game to get back up and shoot again, I have at least 5 or 6 magazines in my dump pouch full. That way I don't have to reload as often and I can get as much as possible out of the class. So that's one big thing that I like to do is carry a dump pouch full of full magazines just so I can limit my reloads.
Yeah.
As far as firearms,
I was just going to interject, Andy. That's a great idea to have, 3 or 4 or 5 extra mags in your dump pouch. So you can just keep going.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're running back to reload, every time you're running to reload, I don't believe in multitasking, right? We can task switch, but we can't multitask. Sure, I can load a magazine and I can listen, but when you're over in a table full of students and all of them have their own conversations going on and you have mass at the other end of the line, it's really difficult to hear. So just kind of a little tip that I would recommend doing if you guys go to classes, buy a bunch of magazines and keep them loaded. Limits your time away from learning. So as far as firearm, I carry a Polymer 80, which is, as you guys know, kind of the Glock 19 clone, Brownells slide, and I have a Hullison 507C red dot, which I've really, really enjoyed a lot. I went to the red dot here probably about a year or so ago, and I really, really enjoy it. I've learned a lot from it. So that's what I carry. That's my everyday carry, with the exception I conceal carry appendix. For me, I just kind of chose to open carry just probably for convenience more than anything. At home, I practice my draw from appendix carry in the bedroom with a unloaded safe handgun with a timer sometimes. So really for that, I just wanted to really focus on my fundamentals of shooting and get as much information as I could from Mass. And as you guys will see through this podcast or any other podcast you've heard Mass, he's just a wealth of knowledge from 1970 all the way up today. So for me, I kind of kept it simple. Jeremy, what'd you do?
So I carried the Glock 48 and a Tenacore Velo, I think I'm saying that right, holster, which is probably the most comfortable holster that I've worn. On the Glock 48, I have the Shield RMSC red dot on there. It held up, did well, no malfunctions or issues with that through the 500 round class. I do think I had some issues with the blue Loctite that I discovered last week. I had 6 10-round mags because I'm waiting on a couple 15-round mags from Shield Arms. I was carrying that stuff. I ran it from appendix for the class. I was running, per Andy's suggestion, the Blue Alpha gear, double layer belt, Velcro inner with the Molly on the outside. I had 4 mag pouches. I had a dump pouch. I think the best advice that I've gotten, after talking with Andy was, bringing a dump pouch with you for your backup, for your extra mags. I would put a box of 50 rounds of ammo in that dump pouch. That way I could reload and listen at the same time. I was running a We Like Shooting / Skinny med kit on my person, with the cat tourniquet in there, some quick clot, all that good stuff. And that's about it. And ammo, I was shooting Angel Fire 115 grain 9mm ammo because I didn't get the 124 grain stuff in time. I think that's it as far as my gear goes. But it was a great class. I'm happy with my gear selection. If there's one thing I would have done, I probably would have went back and probably torqued down the screws on the RMSC a little bit more and made sure I reapplied that blue Loctite after I had to swap out some screws there. But other than that, it was gear held up well. I don't think there was any issues with the gear or anything that caused me to shoot worse gear related.
Awesome. So Mas, can you segue off of that and give us kind of your list of the must-haves when you come to the range? In this particular class, I mean, obviously eyes, ears, ammo, gun, belt, all that stuff. Is there anything else students need to know about?
Well, bring your own hydration. We always provide water, but it's handier to have it right there with you. What we often do and what many hosts do is simply have a few pallets of bottled water there and tell you to grab one. And one thing we've noticed over the years, if everybody's drinking from identical bottles, they set them down on the table, they set them here, they set them there, they turn around, and then they can't tell which is theirs, and it's like, ooh, I don't want somebody else's icky germs, and they let themselves dehydrate.
Sure.
So you tell them, bring some water with you right up to the damn firing line. Anytime you refill your magazines, refill with a little bit of water. The physiologists are telling us probably at least every 15 minutes you ought to be swilling some water, particularly in an outdoor range.
Hey, Masters, we got to go into a little bit more detail. So some things you guys may not know about Mass. He always talks so professional on these YouTubes videos and podcasts, and this dude is a comedian. You guys have no idea. Mass will keep you laughing from start to finish in class, just so you know. But Mass, there was something you said about water and bladders or something like that. You have a catchphrase. What was that catchphrase? Do you remember? I'm going to pick your brain.
I don't remember what it was now that you mention it.
Yeah, did we lose him?
Moss, are you there?
This is the best radio ever.
Moss, do we still have you?
Well, that's fun.
Ready to do it. You're not going to go back and get it.
Oh, okay. There we go. I think we missed the first part of that.
Yeah, well, basically what I was saying was that, like many hosts, we'll typically have a few pallets of bottled water there, and everybody grabs one. But then, you set it down here, you set it down there, you turn around, you go shoot. When you come back and turn back up range, there's 10 identical bottles in sight. You don't know which one's yours. And Americans in particular have an aversion to drinking out of somebody else's drinking container. So I tell them, identify your water bottle with a marker or take your knife and, cut your initial on the bottle cap. And just keep the damn thing right with you. Keep it right with your ammo supply. And every time you refill the mags, refill on some water.
Hey, Mass, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Are you hearing me okay?
Yeah.
Blank spot on this end.
Yeah, I think we dropped you for a minute. So I was bragging about you because, as I was saying, and Jeremy can edit if he wants, I was saying, Mass is usually very serious and very professional on these podcasts. And I don't think people realize that you're a comedian on the range and in the classroom. And you pretty much, you give all the good information, but you keep us engaged and laughing the whole time. And there was a saying you said on the range, and I can't remember what it is, something about drinking water in your bladder or something like that. So can you share that with us?
Keep the belly full and the bladder empty. Okay.
There you go.
Urinate frequently.
I like it.
Urinating frequently, that's a clue that you are dehydrating. And every time you do urinate, check the color, and that's going to give you an indication of whether you're dehydrating or not.
I love it. So one of the biggest takeaways that I had from this class is how much detail and history you provided. This day and age, there's a lot of opinion as fact. Isosceles is, you should shoot isosceles or you should shoot Weaver, this, that, or the other. But one of the things that I really enjoyed with your class is you explained the history for whatever technique it was that we were going over. And then you really went into and explained who that technique is best for. which really, as an instructor, it kind of opened up my eyes to some struggles that we've seen with some of our students on the range, and some different techniques that, we're able to bring back to our students. Why do you include that in your class? Because a lot of times we'll see people, hey, get into a stance that you're comfortable with, and then they'll talk about isosceles and leave it at that. But you really made it a point to make sure that we understood each different position or technique. Talk to us a little bit about why you're so passionate about that, and what you think the benefit of it is for your students.
Well, there are a few reasons for it. First, I'm doing adult education. I've had occasionally to teach from a lectern, but I don't teach from a pulpit, if you know what I mean. Some people teach shooting like it was a religion. There is my least favorite word in the business is doctrine. You must do this because this is the best, period. No, it may be the best for some people, for some things. Nothing is the best for every application and for every individual that you're going to be sharing your knowledge with. So to understand what something's for and just where the place is for it in your particular toolbox, you need to know who developed it, why they developed it, what the indications are where that might be the best technique for you to use, even if it's not your favorite default position. And just as important, where are the defects? Where are the contraindications where this would not be the ideal thing? I told them I follow the Archie Andrews rule. Remember Riverdale? It wasn't Betty or Veronica. It was Betty and Veronica. And in this context, it's not Weaver or isosceles. It's Weaver and isosceles. If you look at the martial arts, if you look at boxing, the history of it is the fighter with only one punch doesn't last very long once the action actually starts, and the angles are constantly changing. Every fighter will have a best technique or a best punch, but the one-punch fighter is going to be severely handicapped. Now, where that ties into this, when the instructor tells you use whatever's comfortable, that presumes that you're standing facing your target on a square range, and you've got a choice of which foot goes forward, which foot goes back, yada, yada, yada. When you've got multiple opponents, moving opponents, you may be having to move to take cover, et cetera, et cetera. A whole lot of that goes out the window. So I teach them, just like in a hand-to-hand fight, you want to be able to perform the jab and the cross and the hook and the uppercut, because the moment's going to come when the guy's exposed to what may not be your favorite technique, but your favorite technique won't work at that particular angle. So we teach the Weaver, the original, what we distinguish as the original classic Weaver of Jack Weaver and Jeff Cooper back in the late 1950s. We teach the isosceles with a strong chest squared stance, but a very strong power base. The isosceles is in the arms vis-a-vis the chest, but not in the legs, not in the lower body. And we teach in between them kind of a hybrid of the two, the Chapman method. Chapman himself called it a modified Weaver. So for those not familiar with it, and given that this is all audio, original classic Weaver, your body's going to be in a somewhat bladed stance to the opponent. Your gun hand side leg will be to the rear. Both elbows will be bent. The gun hand will be pushing forward and the support hand pulling back with equal and opposite pressure. Now, the good news with that, it works very well for people like Jeff Cooper himself, who had a history of elbow injuries and might find it painful to lock the arm all the way out. For people in my age demographic, the certified geezers, you start getting arthritis and bursitis in the elbows. Recoil, particularly from a powerful pistol on a locked joint, is torture. Being able to bend that elbow, push and pull, let the muscles do the work instead of the bones and the joints, you've given the shooter another 10, 20 years of shooting life. The isosceles stance makes up for some deficiencies in the Weaver. Now, the classic Weaver is, physiologists who've looked at it have defined it as very much a complex psychomotor skill, a chain of events where each link has to be performed correctly or the whole chain breaks. If you have the wrong foot forward, you're going to very much limit your ability to traverse to your strong hand side. If you push but don't pull with a support hand, your shot is going to go low and probably toward your weak hand side. If you pull with the support hand but forget to apply forward pressure with the firing hand, there's a good chance the shot's going to go high and perhaps to your dominant hand side. The Weaver predated the wide use of concealable body armor and its availability to the private citizen for home defense. And when you angle the torso in the so-called boxer stance of the Weaver stance, you're basically opening up an Achilles heel in an area of the torso that's not protected by the armor. The isosceles stance, where you square your chest to the threat, maximizes the body armor coverage of the torso vis-a-vis the identified threat that you're the one who's shooting at. Now, I remember in my younger days, there was great emphasis put on pivots, because God shot from a Weaver, you should shoot from a Weaver, and if you didn't shoot from a Weaver, you'd be excommunicated and you'd go to hell. So if you had to engage to your strong hand side, you would pivot until you were in a Weaver facing to what was your 9 o'clock. And that was fine on the square range. It's pretty hard to do that when you're seatbelted in a car. Pretty hard to do that on a stairway. Pretty hard to do that when you're up to your calves or even your knees in snow or you're standing on ice. So we taught how to combine. We showed you guys how to, if you know how to do a classic Weaver and you can't move your feet or you're seatbelted into that car and the guy is coming up on the left side of the vehicle behind you and you see him in the rearview mirror, you can simply turn your torso and literally do a 180, what I call a reverse to Weaver, and shoot 180 degrees behind you and get an effective hit. If the Weaver turned out to be your preferred stance, but that same attacker was coming up on the right side of the car and you were right-handed, well, maintaining the perfect Weaver from the waist up, you'd get somewhere between the right side sun visor and the A-pillar of the passenger door, and your body would run out of range of movement and you would die. If you could simply extend your arms into an isosceles, you could shoot to 3 o'clock with very, very good control and take that party out. Chapman's stance was in between the Weaver and the isosceles. The gun arm locked straight out with the shoulder coming forward and the support arm still bent and pulling tight. But instead of that isometric force of the push-pull of the Weaver, what you had was the dynamic tension of skeletal support on one side, forward with the body weight behind it, and the dynamic tension of the support arm pulling back. And being able to blend those together, and then if you had to break free to get to a very steep angle behind you on your, let's say, the right rear passenger door when you're in the left front driver's seat of an American car, simply breaking free to one hand would allow you to do that. And we showed you and the other 30-some people there that if you were standing in flypaper or your feet had been nailed to the floor, you could shoot 360 degrees without moving your feet. And I think for fighting and self-defense, I think that's absolutely critical. Now, again, for anything you're going to teach somebody particularly that they might be using to save their life, I think they have a right to know where it came from, who developed it, what it was developed for, what the indications are for it, and what the contraindications are. And that's why we spent so much time on the background. The other thing is, frankly, you're educating students. You're hoping to hell they'll educate others and spread the knowledge. And if they don't know where it came from, they don't really know where things are going. I think human history is if you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going.
No, I love it. And that was, it was a great takeaway. And I think it was, particularly for myself and I'm sure for Andy as well. It was refreshing to get that in a class setting and on the range. That way we knew, and I think it allowed us, and I know it allowed me to kind of think through those different techniques a little bit more thoroughly and say, okay, this makes sense and that makes sense. And oh yeah, okay, I could see where this has its place. I know there was another student that was shooting near Andy and myself that, going into that kind of, who this really benefits and who might be able to use this technique versus another technique. He had a shoulder condition that he was able to, he didn't correct his shoulder condition, but he was able to shoot more accurately by switching his stance up a little bit. based on what you had said on the range there and what you had showed us. You'd mentioned there were 30 some other students. I think there were 34 students in that class. And you broke us up into two relays, relay 1 and relay 2. And there were several adjunct instructors there. But you guys did an excellent job making sure that every student that needed something got it, whether it be coaching, a friendly reminder for their trigger finger or what have you. How do you run a line with 34 students, or in this case, how do you run a line with 17 students?
You've got to have great staff. Our hosts did a wonderful job. They had brought in some certified range officers that they knew were competent. So I had briefed them on here's what our protocols are. Our safety rules are somewhat different from many of the other schools. And we were pretty much all on the same sheet of music. Essentially, we'll have, as you know, if we're clearing the guns and the range is going cold, the MAG20 class is generally done as a cold range, and I'll explain why in a minute. The shooter checks his or her gun by sight and by feel. And while you feel stupid, sticking your finger into the gun in broad daylight when you can see it's unloaded, what we're really doing is programming them for the night they're going to have to clear a gun at 3 o'clock outdoors on a moonless night. The gun will be then checked by the range officer. And now sight and feel constitutes 2 checks. Sight and feel by the range officer is 2 more. So every gun has been checked 4 times. We have them, once they're holstered, to go to parade rest with the hands behind the back. That's a visual signal to all of us behind the line that the hands are no longer holding guns. And again, it's something that programs them for when they're out shooting with their buddies or shooting with their relatives and they don't have a certified range officer or a designated range officer. When you're on the line, all you've got to do is, with your own hands behind your back, just lean back at the hips, look left, look right. You can see everybody else's hands are empty. So safety is really our focus. And we have had very good luck with that over the decades.
Yeah, I don't think there was any. I didn't feel unsafe at any time. And when you show up to a class and there are that many other students on the range, you know a couple of the folks there, but you can't know everybody. As a student, that's one of the concerns that I always have. Is the guy that's shooting to the left or to the right of me. How safe are they going to be with their gun? And I can only hope that it wasn't somebody that's been shooting their entire life that had their Uncle Joe teach them everything that they know. But you guys did a fantastic job running a safe range and an informative range. I was the guy from out of town with the briefcase. The credit really goes to Tom Tomasi and Anthony Salazar, our hosts. They were the ones who set it up. They were the ones who arranged for the range officers. Each of them on each side of the range was essentially chief range officer for his side, and I was in the center, 1 layer behind them. So layered like that, the regular ROs, then the chief CROs, and then the range master who's calling the line. You've got essentially you've got a very comprehensive view of everybody and what everybody is doing, and nothing gets missed. Yeah. The other thing is it was efficient.
Guys, put the credit for that.
Yeah, Tom is a great guy. Andy and I have talked to him before, and we've talked to him since. He's one of the local instructors down here that we recommend to potential students. I think it was my first time meeting Anthony, but they are great guys, and they had a great team out there. The other thing that I really noticed about the range is that it was efficient, right? Downtime was really minimized. And it's typically a 20-hour class, but with the folks that we have in charge of the range that we were on, they were hell bent on making it as, shaving some time off there. But you guys ran a really efficient range. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and how you set up your drills to really allow everybody to get the benefit for each round that's fired? And kind of what I'm getting at there is the 6-round strings of frag.
Yeah. Well, with each technique, we follow the crawl, walk, run philosophy. We know we might get a new shooter, and we might get a guy who's been shooting, let's say, Weaver stance since he went to gun sight in 1981, but hasn't really given a chance to the modified Weaver of Chapman or the isosceles. So the crawl, walk, run for us is first we'll have them take the given stance empty hands, and we'll talk them through that. That lets me real quick with them in a semicircle around me see who's doing it right, who's getting their weight properly balanced, the 60% body weight forward that I want on the forward leg, common to virtually every stance. Then we'll put them on the firing line all together and have them dry fire it. That basically brings the whole practice concept together. Then when we go live, the progression is slow fire, timed fire, and rapid fire. The slow fire is the assessment phase. That's where you can really see how steady the sights are on the target with this particular gun. How long is it taking from the instant of the shot to the sights to be tracking back on target, that sort of thing. The timed fire is in each element of it, each stage, whether it's kneeling or one hand or two hand or whatever, is going to come ultimately out of their qualification that they shoot at the end of the second day, and that gives them a little bit of practice time for the qual. Finally, the rapid fire. We do not define a certain amount of time for rapid fire, except for one stage where I want 6 shots in 1 second. Our definition of rapid fire is as fast as you can hit the center zone of that target at that distance with that gun on that day. Now, one of the big arguments, as you know, in the training business is, this police department is training their guys just to qualify. Bad. But this other school, this private school, is teaching them to hit as fast as they can. Good. Quest for personal excellence. And again, for me, it's Betty and Veronica. The qualification is not by any means just an arbitrary thing for the bean counters. As you know, what I do mostly is the legal side of this stuff and the other classes. And I've been an expert witness in the courts on weapons cases and shooting cases for 40 years now. One of the things that prosecutors and plaintiffs will play up on, particularly with the armed citizen, is what qualified you to be out there on the street carrying a loaded gun and endangering the public when you're not a trained, experienced police officer. The reason I give you a police qual at the end is I want you and your attorney to be able to say, sir, the record shows this defendant qualified to a long-established police standard. And that basically is the reason that's there. So again, it's not either or. There's a reason to train to qualify, but the rapid fire elements that is the quest for excellence element. How fast can I control this gun, shooting it this way at this distance when I have to hit something this size and I have to do it right now or die? So basically, that's the progression that we take with every stance, with every technique. The further back you get from the target, of course, the slower rapid fire becomes. If you're going for a brain shot instead of a chest shot, obviously the slower rapid fire is going to be. But it helps them to develop that critical pace, and pace more than anything except perhaps trigger control is what's going to make the difference between winning and losing, whether it's a two-way range or a one-way range.
That really drove home for me how fast was too fast or how slow was too slow in a couple instances. But the other thing, kind of breaking it down that way, slow fire, each technique was pretty easy. But then we picked up to, timed fire and then rapid fire. And I was like, oh man, that doesn't work for me at all. The other thing that, another takeaway for me, when we were looking at the grips, and looking at single hand shooting, you broke down a couple different ways that people, well, you explained how people typically do it, right? And that's how I typically do it. And that's the one hand on the gun. My dominant thumb is still pointed kind of straight along the frame down at the target. So you explain that technique, and then you explain another technique, and between the two, that new technique that really I hadn't been introduced to previously, really increased or it reduced my group size. It shrunk my group under rapid fire. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure, and it's one thing your listeners can do. Hell, even if they're driving their car while they're listening to your podcast, take your hand, and if you're driving, take your hand out in front of you so you can watch the road at the same time. Leave your thumb up, and with the rest of your hand, make a hard fist. Crush as hard as you can, mentally measuring your strength. Now, slowly start bringing the thumb down. It'll pass a 45-degree point, like when I had to carry the Smith & Wesson Auto required on safe. The 45-degree thrust of the thumb popped that safety off, mounted on the slide, much more effectively than trying to flip it off the median joint like you were shooting marbles. Then bring the thumb straight down, pointed straight forward ahead of you, the most popular competition technique today. Finally, still crushing, max force, still measuring. Bring the tip of your thumb down, bend 90 degrees at the median joint, the middle joint. Point the tip of the thumb down to the ground, and you'll feel how much your hand strength has increased. That's how much you are throwing away if you've only got one hand on the gun and you've got to get it back on target for a follow-up shot right now. And you're not shooting a 22 target pistol, you're shooting a Glock 27 with a New York trigger or something. The other big advantage of thumbs down is if there is an attack on the gun, it will probably come by surprise. You have the gun out, you were looking around for whatever went bump in the night, and whatever went bump in the night comes at you from the flank. If the thumb is up or even straight, a lateral strike to the gun is going to peel it out through the open side of the hand. Fascinating thing with the physiology of the human hand. With the thumb curled all the way down, the thumb doesn't just close the gate, but having bent it, locks that thumb in. And you're going to be able to hang on to that gun a whole lot longer, hopefully not longer enough to do a retention technique and regain control of your pistol. So for all those reasons, after many years of the 45-degree thumb and the straight thumb, I went back to the old thumb curl down position as primary. The other thing was you've got a lot of fine instructors and champion shooters today, from Rob Latham to Bill Rogers. Now, I interviewed both of them for Gail Pepin's Pro Arms podcast at proarmspodcast.com. And you'll hear each of them say that they recommend straight thumbs, that is, the thumb pointed straight down along the frame of the pistol for two-handed shooting, and doing so with both thumbs. But for one-handed shooting, they recommend curling the thumb down. And both of them will tell you the reason is it gives you more strength. When you've only got one hand to stabilize that gun against a trigger pull that's heavier than the weight of the gun itself, the stronger your hold is, the steadier you're going to be, and the surer the shot's going to be, and the faster you're going to be back on target. Now, in the competition environment, we know before that timer buzzer goes off whether it's a one-hand stage or a two-hand stage, and we can determine accordingly, thumb straight, thumb down, thumb up, thumb wherever. The problem you got with that is when you need it for real, you are not going to know if it's a two-hand stage until the second hand gets there. And if that second hand is occupied with something else, you're going to have to go with what you've got. And I figured, I've been doing this for a whole lot of time and a whole lot of hundreds of thousands of rounds. And I don't think I could make that distinction without knowing beforehand which way I was going to be able to shoot in a reactive situation. How the hell can I ask a new student to do that? So what I went back to was the thumb curl down as total default for one-handed and for two-hand. When my second hand can't, my support hand can get on there, I'm right-handed, my left thumb will curl down over the right thumb. Easy way to remember it is thumbprint over thumbnail. And both hands in a max force, 100% crush grip. And what I found with that, after a lot of years of straight thumb shooting versus curl down thumb shooting, my scores didn't change, my time didn't change, and basically for me, for my particular needs, it gave me the best of all worlds. And that's why I offer it as an option to all my students.
Yeah, Mass, digressing back to, and you can tell me who said it. That's one thing I'd love to see from you. And if you have one, feel free to email it or share it. But I'd love to see all the things you talk about in the course, who said it on a piece of paper, printed out, because I'd love to kind of see that and be able to reference it back. But
wow. Well, basically, a lot of that is in my book, Stress Fire. That's still available on Amazon and from Police Bookshelf. Police Bookshelf is Ayoob.com. A lot of it is in my Gun Digest Combat Shooting book and my Gun Digest, they just issued a new printing of it, 6th edition of Gun Digest book of combat handgunnery.
Nice. One thing you say in class when you talked about that, and Jeremy's holding up that exact book. I guess I need to grab it myself. It's not the way, it's a way. And, going back to this curl thumb down, yeah, I shoot thumbs forward. And that was one of the little nuggets, shooting one-handed, taking your thumb straight down to curl under. It's amazing how much grip you add to your hand, one-handed shooting. So there's a lot of things like that were tidbits.
The next handgun retention course, you'll find out how much easier it is to hang on to the gun when the other guy's trying to rip it away from you.
For sure. Yeah, I'd love to take that course. Feel free to come back down here to Albuquerque. But, as an instructor, Jeremy and I, we teach all the time. We shoot all the time. And at first we're like, we've heard opinions of other instructors. Massad teaches kind of a lot of the old school methods, and, he hasn't quite brought all the newer stuff. And, I was completely, it was completely different for me because I think I got both.
Veronica, as I said out there, you have to stay on top of the new methods. That's why I go to Rogers School. That's why I took a Gabe White class last year. That's why I go and don't just teach, but take the classes when I go to the Range Master Tactical Conference, Tom Gibbons' program. So you've got to stay on top of the new stuff. But as I said in the class, we all focus so much on being the pioneer who goes where no man went before and finds a new and better way. Sometimes we need to be the archaeologist and dig back through the sands of time that covered up old techniques that really worked and just got lost because they ceased to be trendy.
Mm-hmm.
The more tools you have in your toolbox, the better a workman you're going to be, no matter what it is you're trying to build.
Yeah, for sure. And, guys like us who teach, we're low men on the totem pole. We teach concealed carry course. And although we teach quite a few people, often we'll get young and old. We'll get people that'll walk in with a brand new gun in a box and say, "Teach me how to shoot this." And then we'll get the guys that literally fought in World War II that come out and shoot their 1911s with us. And it really helped me to be able to be that archaeologist, to take it back and to understand a little bit better of the older styles of shooting, and not to be so fast to want to try to change them, right? If they're shooting well, I can see the methods now and the reasoning behind shooting the way that they do, and that's really helped me a lot as an instructor as well. So, I don't know how to.
Counting the staff, there were more than 40 of us there on that range, and there were no two of us who were identical twins. There were no two of us who had the exact same height, weight, physical strength, muscle mass, muscle tone, habituation, which is definitely a factor, the exact same shape of hand vis-a-vis exact same shape of gun, and any of those eye dominance vis-a-vis hand dominance, any one of which might make one technique better for shooter A and another technique better for shooter B. And that's why the more tools you have, the more you're going to be able to adapt that student for what's going to work best for them at that time in their life. The other thing you've got to look at, and I'm an example, I started shooting as a kid, started competition in my teens, and I'm 71 now. The changes in the body, in my case, mainly arthritis, which seems unfortunately to be focused in the gun hand, has changed somewhat my own approach. Techniques that I didn't like so much at another time in my life work better for me now than the techniques that worked better for me when I was 20 or 35 or even 45. And all of us hope to get old, and it would be kind of nice to have in reserve to know what to do if, well, you notice, for example, my hand with the twisted thumb from the arthritis, I had difficulty hitting the mag release with my right thumb. So I'm right today. I've got to shoot a IDPA match this weekend, the sheepdog match, And I'm carrying the gun I'll use there, a Glock 19 Gen 5, with the mag release flipped over to the right side so I can hit it with my trigger finger, which will be a whole lot faster for me on the timed reloads. Jeff Cooper with the injured elbow, you can understand why the classic Weaver stance worked so well for him and why he bonded with it and literally made it his signature.
That makes sense. What, Andy, what was the most challenging part or the most rewarding part of this class for you?
Well, the most rewarding part is easy because I beat you and I outshot you. I'm just saying.
A lot too, man. By a good bit.
Rivalry on the podcast.
Yeah. Shot me by 8 points, 7 points.
Yeah, that was the easy part because I've been working really, really hard on my grip. And Massad, I have a question for you after this. That was kind of my more rewarding part. Not that I beat Jeremy. It's just that I did so well. You know, I've my increased shooting, my skill, my ability to be able to actually do what I teach is very important to all instructors, right? As they say, you know, how it's difficult being an instructor if you can't shoot yourself. Not literally, but shoot well yourself, I should say. So that was big for me.
You don't have to be a state champion or anything to teach this stuff. But if you can't teach yourself, you've got to ask yourself what qualifies you to teach a whole separate human organism.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can agree with that. And the most challenging, I wouldn't call it challenging, just like I said about just the thumb going under one-handed, just the small nuggets that we were able to take and be like, oh, you know what? I need that for class, or I need this for my shooting. This has really helped me here. And then just trying to learn history. I've more and more when we do these podcasts and we talk to gentlemen like yourself, Massad, or we've had Carl Wren, we've had some other people that talk about the history in the past of who did it and who started it. Man, I really think that's huge. And I think a lot of firearms people, gun guys, we're missing that. We're missing the who's who of who actually started this. You know, people talk about Tueller, but yet nobody knows who Tueller is, or Colonel Jeff Cooper. What did he actually do? What did he teach? Where did he come from? More and more, and I don't know if it's just because I'm old, because when I was young, I hated history. But now that I'm getting older, I'm really enjoying learning who's who and where this stuff came from. And I think it helps a little bit for your own credentials to be able to know that you've actually done a little bit more than the average gun person, that you have a little bit of experience and knowledge by learning from others. Does that make sense?
It sure does. And you mentioned Carl Wren, which you were psychic because I was about to. Carl is not only an outstanding instructor in his own right and a grandmaster and right on top of all the modern cutting edge stuff, but he does a wonderful class he calls Historic Handgun that goes back to literally pre-World War II days. And if you take the full course, you get to shoot the Army courses and the police courses of the different periods. Jeff Cooper's gun sight qualifications circa the 1980s. Up into, you know, some of the drills of today. And it really gives you a wonderful handle on, on where all this evolved from. And as I said before, if you don't know where you came from, you really don't have a good fix on where you're going. So I strongly recommend Carl's training, not only his regular state-of-the-art stuff, but his historical handgun in particular, you guys would just eat up. It was one of the most courses I've taken.
Definitely. So my question real quick, Massad, is, in talking about old versus new, you kind of started the podcast and you mentioned it about our grip, right? That 60-40% that's taught. You know, one thing that's really that I've had to work on a lot because I have a bad ring finger. I've really had to work on my grip and my grip strength. And forever, you know, that thought of the 60-40, you talk to other instructors and they're like, just hang on to the dang gun, right? Hold on to the gun. Give a good solid pressure.
People are agreeing with the crush grip. The max.
Yeah.
Crush that thing as hard as you can. People
the more I think about it,
I ask, how hard would you crush a child molester's testicles? Okay. Hold it like that. Right above.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Well, the more I think about it and just kind of overanalyzing as I like to do, the 60-40 thing for me is like, well, what's 60%? What's 40? We don't know what that is. But for me, it's made it to where it makes me focus on my quote unquote non-dominant hand to squeeze tighter than I normally would. And that's what's kind of forced me to make myself squeeze tighter with the dominant hand and get that strength. So do you think it was an actual get people to actually think about it, or do you think they were back in the day it was actually a 60-40% mindset?
Well, remember that 60-40 really only goes back to like the early 1980s. You go back deeper. I knew Charlie Askins. Charlie once wrote, "You should use a grip that crushes granite." And people said, well, isn't it supposed to be squeeze it till my hand trembles and then back off? And he said, no, damn it. Your hand is going to tremble anyway. Get used to it now. And if you do it enough, your hand's going to stop trembling. I knew Colonel Rex Applegate, and he was an early advocate of the crush grip. He called it convulsive grip. And I asked him once, Rex, when you say convulsive grip, what do you mean exactly? He said, I mean, hold the goddamn gun as hard as you can. I said, if you had just said that the first time, a whole lot more people might have got it. Yeah. But go back over history, read Bill Jordan. He was the single fastest man I ever saw with a gun. He was kind enough to write the foreword for my first book in 1978, Fundamentals of Modern Police Impact Weapons. And if you read his classic book on this, No Second Place Winner, he talks about the extremely hard grip to stabilize the recoil of a powerful gun with a trigger pull that's much heavier than the weight of the gun itself. It's nothing new, but it's a classic example of sometimes you got to go back and dig through history. Rob Latham, probably more than anyone else, was responsible for the 60-40 thing in the 1980s. But he was also at that time shooting 1911s with the early AccuComp compensators and the lightest possible recoil and the lightest possible trigger. If you listen to my podcast interview with him at proarmspodcast.com, you'll hear me ask him, how hard do you teach people to hold the gun now? And you'll hear him answer, as hard as they can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at the end of this class, and I actually I think I was proud of myself. It was my own little trophy. I walked up and showed you, and I even posted it on Facebook. I gripped my gun so hard this weekend, and I guess maybe just sissy hands, right? Because now I'm behind a computer all day. But I had a blood blister in the middle of my palm just squeezing my gun so hard. But it showed proof because, I did really well. I named myself first loser on the podcast today because I tied for second, which, and I think a lot of that has to do with the grip. And so that was a big for me. But I was just curious.
We had a whole lot of good shooters there, brother, and tying for second is something to be proud of in that crew.
Yeah, I agree. I think we had some amazing shooters there. Jeremy, what are your thoughts on that? What's a big thing that you kind of took away that really helped yourself improve going forward?
I think the biggest thing that I took away from this class is a new way not a new way for me, but kind of how to hone my own personal practice and training. The biggest takeaway that I had for me is the different grip and stance techniques, and really giving myself the time to actually shoot something other than what I initially thought was my best shooting stance and shooting grip. That one-handed, single-handed shooting is something that I've challenged myself to work on more over the next couple of months, because it's realistically, if it is a defensive shooting situation, it'll probably be one hand only. Hopefully it'll be my dominant hand only, but it might be my non-dominant hand. My biggest challenge though was Weaver, and I can't shoot from a Weaver stance for crap. And I don't know, I think I know what it is. It's because overall I don't grip the gun at all like I should. Took Tim Herron's class, this class, I don't have enough support hand grip on the gun. So I think in Weaver, I was either pushing too much or pulling with too much, depending on which string of fire. So that would be my biggest challenge, the biggest challenge for that class. from the instructor standpoint, I always look to see how other instructors are running the range, how they're keeping it safe. Ray, in this class, it was a cold range, like Moss said. When we're doing our basic concealed carry course, it's a cold range. And we have a couple different challenges that we have to overcome with that. Our students aren't out there with holsters, but it was nice to be on a range with so many other students to really see how Moss and his instructors, how they kept it safe and efficient. So from an instructor standpoint, that was, aside from what we've already talked about, like the history and the pros and cons, who these grips and who these different techniques really work for. I think that would be my second biggest takeaway from the instructor standpoint.
Yeah, we've got to give some more credit where credit's due. Moss, with all due respect, I don't think you ran that range at all. I think there was somebody else there that was kind of helping you. You want to expand on who pretty much runs the show?
Well, I called the firing line. The guys who are out there, the chief range officers, are the ones who run the show.
No, I think there was a lady there that was.
If you want to find out how the Army works when the boots are on the ground, you ask a sergeant, not a general. If you want to find out what's happening in a police department, the same thing. You ask a sergeant, not the chief. You want to find out what's happening at the hospital, you don't ask the Board of Regents, you ask the head nurse. And you want to find out what's going on in the world of the courthouse, you don't ask the chief judge, you ask the clerk of court. Here, the chief range officers, the ones who supervise the line officers, are the ones who really keep it going.
I think there was somebody else. I think we're missing that one person. If you really need to know what's going on, you don't ask Massad, you ask somebody else. Who would that be?
Well, that would be probably my lovely bride and adult supervisor, Gail Pepin.
There you go.
Man, she kept it. Man, it was awesome to see her on the range. We got 34 folks out there all running guns, man, and she was on the ball. And it was awesome to see.
Hell of a shooter too.
Hell of a shooter, man. Hell of a shooter. She outshot
300 with no warm up.
Yeah, 300 no warm up, and I think her group was only bested by yours. But yeah, that was awesome to see too, because she didn't pull any punches. She made sure that we were on top of it and everybody was staying safe.
Gail is a mom and a great mom. And if you take one of my tactical classes, when we get in a command voice, one of the things that I repeat like a refrain, the two best sources to learn command voice are a Marine drill instructor or your mother. And every now and then, you just need a mom on the line.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I can agree with that.
As an instructor who sees so many students in a year, what are some of your pet peeves or some things that students do to kind of frustrate you, if there is anything?
Oh, the ones that came there to show off, not to learn. You tell them, okay, son, that's a pretty good isosceles, but I'd like you to try a Weaver for this particular stage. Oh, but I like isosceles. Son, you could have done that at home and saved the tuition fee. Okay. The ones who kind of get in their little bubble, and those tend to be either the nervous new students or the old farts who own their own range. They've got their own backstop on the back 40, and they're used to being the only one there. And they forget there's 30 or 40 other people around who are dependent on them for their safety. The last class we taught at that ranch in Albuquerque a few years ago, we had one guy who was, a good shooter, didn't quite see his hits at 15 yards, and started walking forward to look at his target while everybody else was shooting. And I, of course, grabbed him on the line and kicked him off the firing line. But basically, when you're in a class, you've got to remember you are, I'm not asking for a hive mind. I am asking for all of us, including me and my staff, to be aware that everybody has to be safe for everybody. Usually you paid to learn. You paid to learn something new. You could have gone to the public range for a whole lot less money and practiced doing what you're already doing. So those are a couple of my pet peeves, I guess.
Yeah, your range safety brief was top notch. It put the fear of God in me. It took me the first couple drills to kind of shake off the nervousness, because I was like, man, don't be the guy that has to wear the dunce hat. But again, it reassured me as a student, because I knew you guys took the safety thing seriously, and it was I didn't have to worry as much about it, right? I was still, conscious of everything that was going on around me. But I didn't have to sit there and really, I wasn't distracted by it, which was awesome. And, running it from appendix, I was double safe with it, just because I didn't want to be, I didn't want to set the example. I didn't want to have an issue where, I was thought to be unsafe. So I really appreciate that. And we're about the hour.
I don't want to be the guy who demonstrates that a Glock actually does have decocking capability.
Yeah, I don't ever want to be. I don't ever want to be that guy. I'm going to steal that. I'm using that in class. If appendix carrying Glocks ever comes up in class, I'm using that line.
It's any straight fired gun. That's why I recommend right out there in Albuquerque, Tom Jones's device, the SCD, the striker control device, called colloquially the Gadget. It's an easy retrofit, replaces the backplate on your Glock, and by applying thumb pressure as you're holstering, it locks the trigger for so long as you're applying the thumb pressure. And I wish that were possible on every striker-fired gun out there.
Yeah, as it gains popularity, hopefully we'll see it adapted for other striker-fired guns. And I remember when that first thing hit the market, when that thing first hit the market, it caught some internet hate and social media hate, but now it seems to be widely accepted. They don't have them right now. Last time I checked, they were sold out for the Glock 48. But as far as I know, you're able to check those guys out and get one for any gen Glock right now, other than a 48 or 43, until they are restocked on those.
Yeah, we didn't quite cover it. It's called the Striker Control Device, or SCD, by Tau Development Group. I too am looking into probably grabbing one of those myself, because I also appendix carry, and I still have yet a little bit of a belly to overcome, but I think it's just that extra little bit of safety and reassurance. I think there's nothing wrong with it, and I think it's a great idea. I'm probably going to add one to mine as well.
It's thoroughly tested and vetted. There's no downside, and assuming that you actually use it, it's simply one more safety net. Why not?
Yeah.
I said, folks listening at home, Tau Development, TAU Development. Google will get you there. You can install the thing yourself, and strongly recommend it.
Yeah. They don't have Punisher skulls on them, though, so that might eliminate.
I'm out.
Yeah.
Guaranteed Employment Act.
Yeah. It will prevent your Glock from from having a decocking lever on it. So we're about an hour and 15. I want to, Mas, give you I know you're a couple hours ahead of us, so I'd love to get you the rest of the evening back. We really do appreciate you coming into Albuquerque for that class, and then for coming on the podcast again and sharing your wealth of knowledge with our listeners. Is there?
We're finishing up our 2020 schedule. We may be back in Albuquerque. We'll determine that this week. Possibly doing one of our deadly force classes, or combining that with a MAG20 range and what we call a MAG40 40-hour training.
If Tom is giving you any trouble or grief about that classroom portion, let us know, and we'll light a fire, because that's definitely a class that we are both going to take. And I know you need more than Andy, Tom, and myself, but we definitely want to get that class out here to Albuquerque.
Sure. Any of your listeners interested, go to MassadAyoobGroup.com. We should have next year's schedule up. We've got classes all over the country, and there's something in more or less striking distance for most everybody if they're interested.
That's MassadAyoobGroup.com. It'll be in the show notes. We appreciate everybody jumping on. Mas, thanks for helping us keep this the safest podcast on the internet with 0 desk pops to date or negligent discharges. Remember, it's your life, it's your safety and protection, it's your responsibility. We'll see y'all next week. Have a great night.
Man, we really hope you enjoyed listening to that episode as much as we did interviewing and having our guests on. Be sure to share this with your friends and family and head over to patreon.com/afteractionproject. We'd love to have you on as a guest panelist, and be sure to check out those other rewards that we have for our Patreons.
If you're a recent graduate of a firearms-related training course and would like to join us on our show, or if you'd like us to review a specific firearm-related training course or instructor, shoot an email to show@afteractionproject.com. Remember to join a local firearms advocacy organization. As always, stay safe, shoot straight, and remember to secure your firearms so that unauthorized persons cannot gain access to them.